So let me introduce Wes to you. I kind of fell in like with this guy at our Hopi camp. We ate our meals at a Mennonite church, and so on the first night we were eating, I noticed him because he's a pretty large human being. So I thought, I got to go talk to that guy, and I found out he's into sports. He's a youth minister, and I said, what are you doing for the rest of the week? And he kind of looked at me like, wonder where this is going. And I said, I could use you, and so the rest of the week he helped me do recreation. Literally, I helped you, because you wouldn't let me do anything. So, as a way of introduction, I'll say this. I told a story up there, and in the middle of the story, sometimes when you're telling a story to young people, you look to see people that you can get involved in it, and I needed a big man. And so, I don't even know Wes that well when this happened, but I introduced him into the story, and the story needed a big man, and the big man ended up taking my punishment. So I ran to the back of this room, and then I had Wes standing up where I'm standing right now. And part of the story is I'm so thankful that somebody paid the price for my sin that I run up, leap into the air, and that person, I just hug him. So Wes doesn't know me. And I'm running down the aisle, he's up front, and I'm thinking, do I launch myself into the air, or do I just reach out and hug him? And I thought, maybe I shouldn't launch myself. Maybe I'll just reach out and give him a big bear hug. My good friend, Wes.
My name is Wes. I'm Navajo from Arizona. My mother, my clan is Water's Edge, and I'm born from my father's clan, which is the Red Street. And I do ministry out on the Hopi Reservation. That's where I live. I'm not Hopi, I'm Navajo. Well, we live right next to each other, and it's definitely something that God has called me to do, and I can get a little more into that. But first off, I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to be here. It's an honor and a privilege to get to be here. And most importantly, I want to thank you guys, this church specifically, thank you guys so much for helping myself and the young people that I work with by donating to us to help fund a lot of my students going up to a conference that we go to every year called Warrior Leadership Summit. You guys helped make that possible, and I want to thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. That really meant a lot to us, to meet Gary over at the church, and to instantly kind of just get to know him and meet with him on a basis, and to share with him what I do, and for him to come alongside and say, I think our church would be interested in helping you guys, and I'm just glad that you guys were. But kind of just to give you guys a background of where I come from, who I am, and even just kind of, just life on a reservation. But, I grew up, like I said, on the reservation, a small community called Noshtoitlane. It's called Mini Bobcat Hills in Navajo. And throughout my life, I kind of moved back and forth between my mom and my dad's house. But, growing up, one thing that I don't really appreciate about my story, about my life story, is that my story is not rare. There's a lot of young people in the community that I serve, and even just within my community back at home, that have the same story, or that have gone through a lot of the same things that I've gone through. But growing up, I watched my mom sit in a pool of her own blood. I grew up watching my mom, get hurt by my dad. I grew up with a dad who was, an alcoholic, and he drank a lot, and I didn't understand why he did a lot of the things that he did. But, at a young age, I had to see a lot of the things that I did. I had to see him hurt my mom, and there was a lot of times I didn't understand why he did that. And it left a lot of confusion inside my heart and a lot of confusion inside my mind, because I already had an idea of what a father was supposed to be, and my dad wasn't being it. In my mind, he's supposed to be a provider, he's supposed to be a protector, but he was doing the complete opposite of that. And as a result of that, it felt like as a young person, 11, 12 years old, there was things I had to do that no 11, 12-year-olds should ever have to do. There was times I would have to make sure I was closest to the door so that I I had the closest means of escape whenever my dad started to get in one of his emotions, or he would get mad, you know, or whenever he came back drunk, or when he was intoxicated, you know, I had to prepare myself, you know. And there was a lot of things growing up that I realized what I was doing, you know, no normal kid should have to do. And as a result of that, you know, as I started to get older, you know, a sense of like bitterness and hatred really just started to grow inside of my heart, because it felt like I couldn't be a kid anymore. It felt like a lot of the other kids in my life, you know, their lives were easier, you know, and it seemed like it kind of always just felt like I was singled out, or it always felt like it was just me, or I was alone, you know, that nobody else was going through what I was going through, you know. And as I started to get older, it really started to affect my life, because I didn't know how to communicate to people what was going on inside my heart. I didn't know how to communicate to people that, you know, that anger that I was feeling, you know, or that bitterness. I didn't know how to communicate that. All I knew how to do was to stuff it, you know. And the way I like to explain it to the young people that I work with, it was like a soda can. You know, I was being shaken in all these different ways, you know, and ultimately you know, you open a pop can that's shaken and it explodes. You know, that's kind of what happened to my life, you know. And the way that came out was, you know, as a senior in high school, and I kept thinking to myself, like, you know, I'm never going to become my dad. I'm never going to do the things that he did. But I found myself at parties. I found myself drinking. I found myself doing drugs. I found myself doing all these different things I said I would never do, but I was doing it. And I remember I woke up specifically one morning and I looked in the mirror and I saw my dad. I thought that was the rest of my life. I thought that's who I was going to be for the rest of my life. Another young Native American man who throws his life away at alcohol. I stood there, I remember standing there and thinking, is this all life has to offer me? Is this all I'm going to become? Am I just another number? Am I just another statistic? Is that who I am? You know, and it really started to scare me, because I felt like I had no outlet. I felt like I had no future. I felt like there was nothing that could bring me out of that darkness. And it really just felt like I had a hole in my heart, to be honest. And I tried to fill it with all these different things, and none of it satisfied me. And it scared me, because I started to think, if nothing can give me what I'm looking for, I don't want to be here anymore. And it was the first time I ever thought about taking my life. And it scared me, because there was a small part of me that wanted to be here. There was a small part of me that wanted to be alive. I just didn't know what that was. You know, growing up, my mom, she would tell me something. As a junior, senior in high school, she would tell me something. All the times I got in trouble, whenever I did things I wasn't supposed to do, or she got phone calls from the dormitory that I went to, you know, when I would get into trouble, she would always say something to me. She would always say, son, Jesus loves you. You know, and I never understood why she would say that to me. I would hate it. I would hate it so much whenever my mom would say something like that to me, because, you know, growing up, Jesus wasn't a part of her life. And so all the things that I ever saw was what my dad did. But as I started to get older, and when I was in high school, I noticed my mom's life started to change. And that was because she was putting her hope in this man's name, in this guy's Jesus. She was putting her hope in this, she was putting her hope in him. And I was seeing that. And I was starting to notice it. And so whenever I got in trouble or I did something I wasn't supposed to do, she would say that to me. Son, Jesus loves you. But of course, me, I was ignorant, you know, and selfish, and I would tell myself, you know, I don't want anything to do with that. You know, I knew about the history of even just when the Europeans first came over to the United States. You know, I knew about the history of how people used the Bible to enslave people. You know, I knew about genocide of Native Americans, you know, and how the Bible was used, even just in boarding schools, you know, how young people were taken from their homes to be put into a school in which their language was to be taken from them, their culture, their tradition, everything was to be taken from them. And all of it was done in the name of church. And so I knew about all of this growing up. And so whenever my mom would say that to me, I would say, I don't want nothing to do with that. I don't want nothing to do with church. I don't want nothing to do with religion. Because it seems like whenever people get involved with that, people come out of it hurt. And I would always put that in her face and tell her, you know what, you know, look at our lives. We grew up poor. We grew up with nothing. We grew up going through what my dad put us through. had never seen evidence of love in my life. And I would say that to her. I'd never seen evidence of love in my life. Why are you trying to tell me that this Jesus guy loves me? But whenever I was in those deepest, darkest moments of my life, that was the question I would think about. Does this Jesus guy love me? Because I had no idea who this guy was. And I would hear it every now and then from people when they would speak that Jesus loved me. Or when people would share stories about Jesus, they would share some amazing stories about how their life transformed and changed. But I didn't know him. I knew about church, I knew about religion, I didn't know Jesus. And I made a choice at that moment. I was like, it's so easy for me to, growing up Native American, it's almost wired in you to not believe in Jesus. And as a result of that, it kind of just put a blindness inside in my life that I'd never given him a chance. And I came to a point where I was really desperate. I was really in need of some type of hope. I needed something to tell me why I was here, or else I was going to take my life. And so that was the first time I gave this Jesus guy a chance. It was the first time I gave the Bible a chance. Because I had to stand there and really look at myself and say, you know what? It's so easy for me to hear what other people are telling me about church or religion, but I never looked at Jesus for myself. And so when I did, it really did change my life, because I read about a brown-skinned man who came from a tribe called Judah, a Mediterranean Jew whose language was not English, who had his own language, a form of Aramaic. And even the Bible, I always thought the Bible was written in English, but the original language is Greek and Hebrew. And even Jesus, where he comes from, Nazareth, everyone say nothing good comes from that place. Sounds like a reservation. I started to make all these small correlations, and I started to see all these small things about Jesus that I had never known before. And even going to even his name, the name Jesus is only 500 years old. It comes from a Greco-Roman derivative of the name Yeshua. If Jesus was to stand here today and introduce himself, he would introduce himself to you guys in his own language, and he would say, my name is Yeshua. I come from the tribe of Judah. You see, and I started to see all these small similarity things, and it was like, I saw that Jesus was like me, but then at the same time, when I read more about who Jesus was in the Bible, he didn't die for his skin color.
Amen.
He died for something so much deeper, and that was our sin. And I had to come to a realization of what sin was, even within my own life. When I was talking to you guys about that void in my heart that I was trying to fill, I was searching for so long for something to give me hope, to give me life. The way I like to explain it to my young people is it's like the Grand Canyon. God's on one side and we're on the other. And we try to fill the canyon with everything so we can get to the other side. We throw drugs in there, we throw alcohol in there, we throw bitterness towards our fathers. We throw all these different types of things inside the canyon, thinking that it will fill, and thinking that we can get to the other side. But it doesn't matter what we throw in there. It never fills. And we can never get to the other side. In the Bible, it talks about an eternal separation. We're literally cut off from God. And yet God recognized this. And so he built a bridge from the other side to us.
Amen.
And the bridge has a name, and it was Jesus.
Amen.
And what really captured my heart and what really transformed my life was when I read about what Jesus did on the cross. He claimed to be the Son of God. He claimed to have come to pay that death penalty for the life that we live, thinking that we can get to the other side. There's a death penalty for that. And the only way a death penalty can be paid, someone has to die. And so Jesus paid that death penalty. And the crazy thing about that, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, I'm just some reservation kid that comes from a community nobody knows about. He would give his life for me. Someone as small and as insignificant as me, he would give his life for me. And I really love that much, so much that God is willing to give his life for me. It was the first time I'd ever felt love in my life. Growing up, whenever I heard I loved you, it was always, what are you trying to take from me? But this is the first time I'd ever felt like I was loved. I felt like I was important. I felt like I mattered. And that's why I gave my heart to the Lord, because I realized He was offering me something. He wasn't offering me church. He wasn't offering me religion. He was offering me a relationship. A living, breathing relationship with the one who made us. And as I saw that, you know, and when Jesus paid that death penalty, the crazy thing about that is when He died, 3 days later, He did something nobody else in this world has ever done. He defeated death.
Amen.
And a God who can defeat death is a God that can come into our lives and transform it and change it and give us hope. You know, this relationship, I have a lot of things to be thankful to God for this relationship. He's helped me see truths about my self-worth and my identity. Most importantly, He's helped me restore my relationship with my mother. He's even helped me restore my relationship with my father. You know, and that's the power that God possesses. And today I wanted to, you know, that's my story, but today I wanted to talk about a person in the Bible, a specific person in the Bible. And all of you guys know him, you know, it's Simon Peter. If who can tell me who Simon Peter is, or somewhere in the Bible where Simon Peter is referenced?
Denied Christ 3 times.
He denied Christ 3 times.
Walked on water.
Walked on water.
Briefly.
And it's funny how we laugh at the briefly, but when you really think about it, how many other guys were still in the boat?
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about Peter, Simon Peter, and his life. You know, definitely reading about Peter and his life has really transformed my life and really helped me see God and Jesus, you know, on a whole new level. And one thing that really sticks out to me as I begin this is that, you know, Jesus knew Peter, you know, when before Peter even met Jesus. And, you know, in John 1:4-2, you know, when Simon Peter first meets Jesus, Jesus says something to him. He says, "You're Simon, son of John." You know, Peter didn't even need to introduce himself to Jesus. Jesus already knew him. How wild is that? And then to go on off of that, you know, Jesus knows who we are before we even come to Him. He knows you. And later, Jesus meets Peter at the Sea of Galilee and asks Peter to follow him. That's in Matthew. But in Luke 5, Peter obeys Jesus to cast his net again, catching many. This story always, I like this story. You know, I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. It says, "They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down to his knees, saying, 'Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord.'" You see, when Jesus first encounters Peter in this part in Luke, it was right after he just got done fishing, and they didn't catch anything. And then Jesus says, throw it back in again. You gotta imagine, you know, he was fishing all night, and Jesus says, "Just throw it in one more time." You know, and he's like, "I'm pretty tired. I just got done fishing all night. I didn't catch anything. I'm pretty bummed out. I'm tired." But he still does it. And what happens? He catches an amazing amount of fish. And one thing that I've always appreciated about the God of the Bible is that whenever He encounters a life, that life is changed forever. And so when He encountered Peter's life in this moment and did that miracle in front of him, what does He do? He literally falls to his feet and he recognizes who Jesus is. And he literally says, you can't even be near me. I'm sinful. And of course, you know, later on, Jesus gives Simon the name. Ty probably knows the name that He gives him, Petra. What does it mean? Rock. You know. But we also know a story about Peter that's pretty difficult, you know. And it was the time that, you know, Jesus tells Peter that He's going to deny Him. But Peter, in that moment, he says it You know, he says it emphatically, you know, in Matthew 26, 34 to 35. Jesus says this, he says, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. So Jesus says, one of you is going to disown me before the rooster crows. And Peter, of course, is the first one to say, it will not be me. And he must have said it, you know, in such a loud and profound and in a confident way. Saying, Jesus, I am not going to deny you. It's not going to be me. But we all know what happens later in Matthew 26 through 34 and 35. It says this. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and the servant girl came to him. You were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again. With an oath, I do not know the man. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then he began to call down curses and swore to them, I don't know that man. Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. You see, at this moment, you know, Peter must have felt really defeated. You know, doing exactly what he said he wasn't going to do. He literally denied the one he loved the most. And, you know, sometimes that can be us. One day we can so proudly and confidently say, God, I'm not going to disown you. But then we're put in probably some of the toughest situations in our life where it's like, am I going to choose to live for Jesus in this moment? Or am I going to be quiet where nobody even brings up the fact that I believe in him? Am I going to, at whatever the cost, avoid this conversation with this person about Jesus? This person in my life that I love so much? Am I going to be quiet about Jesus for so long? My coworker, my friends, these people in my life, am I just going to keep being quiet about it? You know, in the same way, you know, we deny we don't know Jesus when it matters. When the pressure of the world is on us, it's easy to say we don't know Jesus. You know, this morning brought me a lot of comfort as when we were in the men's Bible study, and I kind of got a glimpse of this church. I kind of got a glimpse of its heart. You know, I've done a lot of ministry and I've been a lot of places all across the world, and sometimes it's hard to see even churches moving with the world. You kind of get what I'm saying. You see, there's God's truth, and then there's supposed to be the church right next to it, standing on it firmly as its foundation. And then you have the world, which is constantly moving in different directions. It's constantly moving away from God's truth. And sadly, today, you have the church. It's moving right alongside with it. As long as that gap right there is far enough for people to see that, we are different. We're going to say no to this, no to that, no to that. But we start to see that as the world is moving, the church is moving, keeping that exact same distance, but it's moving right behind it as well. And God's truth is over here still. Mm-hmm. You know, and when I say I got a glimpse of this morning of where this church stands, is you know, one thing that I really like is context. And a lot of these guys were going through context of the Bible and Amos. And it made me think of one thing that I heard a long time ago, and that I hope you guys would take to heart when it comes to Scripture and about standing on God's truth. It's that don't twist the Scripture to fit your life, but to twist your life to fit Scripture.
Amen.
But going back to Peter, you know, he denies Jesus, and of course Jesus gets caught in the garden, and he's going to have to get put before Pontius Pilate and go to the cross. But just that he had just one of his faithless followers deny him. His own people are calling for his crucifixion. And one thing that kind of makes my relationship with Christ that much more real was when I realized exactly what it is that Jesus went through in the time that leading up to when he was going to die on the cross. You see, his own people were calling for his death. And ultimately, he was beaten until he was unrecognizable. Can you imagine that? To be beaten until your own family can't even recognize who you are. You're just laying there, flesh. And they can't even recognize who you are. He was beaten until that moment. And then he was told that he had to carry his cross in which he would die on. And while he's dragging through the street up to a hill, people were spitting on him. The lowest form of humiliation to anybody was to spit on them while they were down. And everyone was doing it to him that day. And to even having a crown of thorns pressed into his skull, scraping against his skull. And I remember a long time ago, I thought about it, the first time I had read about that. And I was thinking to myself, like, you know, Jesus must have been tired. You know, he must have not wanted to do that. To physically go through all of that. Why did he do it? What motivation? What was going through his mind? What was on his heart through all of that? That was making him do that. Do you want to know what it is? I'm looking at it. It's you. But even after, you know, they put Jesus to death, like I was saying, even within my own story, when I read about how, you know, 3 days later he defeated death. Through all that time, you have to imagine where Peter was, what he was thinking. He had just denied the one that he loved the most, and he literally just had to watch him die on the cross. And he has to sit there and think, I denied him. Feeling defeated, feeling weak, feeling vulnerable. But 3 days later, we all know what happens. And that means that Peter's story is not over with yet. In Mark 16, 4-7, this is when Mary Magdalene finds the empty tomb. But it says this, but when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And they entered the tomb, and they saw a young man dressed in white sitting on the right side, and they were all alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter. He's going on ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Isn't it crazy how, even through all of that, he says, and Peter, to kind of almost emphasize it, to make sure, like, hey, tell all of them and Peter, because Jesus had an idea of what Peter was going through. He knew what Peter was going through in that moment. Even after Peter denies Jesus, he still calls for him after his resurrection. You know, that's the Jesus that we serve. Even while we deny, we run, we don't trust him, he still loves and pursues us. Regardless of our denial, he still rose. And when Jesus hears of, or when Peter hears of Jesus' tomb being empty, what does he do? Do any of you guys know? He runs. So to hear the greatest news of all, that the one that he loved the most, the one that he denied, that he felt sorry for denying, when he hears that he rose and that he is alive, imagine the hope that Peter felt. So much to the point that he started to run to his tomb, sprint, not a jog, but to sprint and run to him. And Jesus even appears to Peter first, before all the other disciples. It's in 1 Corinthians if you guys would like to see that. And when he appears to him, he said when he appears to Cephas, which means Peter, and then to the 12. Despite all that Peter had done, Jesus still thought of him, and he still pursued him. And after all of that had happened, by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus confronts Peter again, and he asks him a simple question. And in John 21:15-17, it says this: When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And I want you guys to take note of how many times he asks Peter. "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time, he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt, and he asked him the third time. When he asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know I love you." You know, I'm here today to tell you guys about the story of Peter, but I'm also here to tell you about Jesus. And neither one of us is too far for him. He asked Simon Peter a simple question, and I think it's a question that we need to ask ourselves every single day as well. Do you love him? Should be a yes. Do you love him?
Yes.
I have the privilege and the honor to serve on the Hopi Reservation. I've been serving out there now the past, 7 years. 7 years of my life I've been serving alongside young people, serving them. I work with the youth ministry. It's called Jumpstart. How wild is that? Literally jumpstarting their lives for Jesus. But we work with 12 to 19-year-olds, and you know, one thing I've noticed about Native American missions and even just Native America in general is oftentimes we're seen as, not even seen, but you know, we're the forgotten mission field. You know, you have churches that I have nothing against this. I support it and I love it. But you have churches that are, you know, focused on missions that go across seas, and there's such a focus on that. But sometimes we tend to forget those who are in our back doors, who's in our backyards. You know, the first time I learned about this number, it really broke my heart. But you know, Native Americans were the first people ever reached when it came to the gospel. 400, 500 years of missions, only 4% know Christ. And it's pretty true, because the first time I began a relationship with Christ, it really did feel like I was the only one. I lost a lot of friends, and I became the target of a lot of jokes. And for a long time I was told that I was just whipped. But regardless of all of that, to choose being called all of that while having the peace that God offers, I choose that every day. And, Native America, sadly, the young people that I work with and young people all across Native America, we have the highest rates of suicide. There's sexual assault, the numbers are twice that of the United States average. You have all of these things, as a young Native, it's almost as if you're being born into an uphill battle. It's like all these things are you're already facing, growing up. And it's my honor and it's my privilege to be there and to paint a picture for these young people of who Jesus is biblically. Because like I said, growing up, I thought Jesus wasn't for me. I literally thought Jesus was 6'5", blonde hair, blue eyes. And I didn't think he was for me. And a lot of the young people that I work with, that's a lot of kind of what they say. Oh, I'm this, I'm Hopi, I'm Navajo. I'm not supposed to be that. And so to communicate them who Jesus is biblically, to tell them that they are loved and that they are not too far from God's love, to paint that picture for them and to tell them who their identity is in Christ, it's so rewarding. And it's good. This past year, we got to take 14 young people up to a conference called Warrior Leadership Summit. It's a week long, every July. And so this is about 500 to 600 Native youth from tribes all across Native America. And a good majority of them are believers in Christ. And so I remember the first time I went there, I was like, whoa, I didn't know there was this many Native believers, And so at this conference, it's a week long, and throughout that week, we have guest speakers, and we have people who speak, and all of them are Native. I'm one of them, fortunately, and I get honor and a privilege to be one of them as well. And throughout that week, we give them an opportunity to see Jesus, biblically, but most importantly, we also give them tools that they can have to go back into their communities to be that light for Jesus in their communities when it's the darkest. And that's the thing about a dark room. It only takes one match. And you'll see that light. And, God has opened up some doors for me. I work for a ministry called Ron Hutchcraft Ministries. Ron Hutchcraft, south side of Chicago, does a lot of radio ministry growing up. Did a lot of cross-cultural ministry in the Chicago area with young people. And God got a hold of his heart when he came to a reservation, the Window Rock Reservation, to speak. And he had no idea that there was a need in Native America for Jesus. And God put it on his heart and his wife's heart to start the ministry of On Eagle's Wings. And On Eagle's Wings is a ministry that it's a month long, and it consists of 30 to 40 team members, all from different tribes who believe in Jesus, who want to make that difference, who want to tell other Native Americans about Jesus. And God really amplified what I was supposed to do in my life the first year I went on that team, because it was also the first year that I shared my testimony. And I was scared and I was terrified. I didn't want anybody to know my story. And there's in Japan a long time ago, there was a tsunami that happened. Hold up, let me look at the story. I have it in my notes. Okay, so in Japan there was this tsunami that had happened, and this is referencing my story and how I was scared to say it. I didn't want to say it, but what had happened in this story was this lady. Her name was Sue Tukumashi, and the tsunami was so severe that it hit down all of these homes and these businesses, and there was so much glass all over that washed up on the sea. A lot of brokenness and a lot of despair, and through all of that, her and a couple other ladies would go through the wreckage and everything, and they would find shards of glass, and they would make earrings, which turned into an organization, turned into a whole deal selling this jewelry in order to make money for the people that lost their homes. And literally what had happened was, out of brokenness, they made beauty. In the same way, God reaches into our brokenness and he makes something beautiful. And that's what he was showing me in that moment, that through my brokenness and through my pain, I could show people who Jesus was. And so that on Eagle's Wings is what we do, is we go out into communities and we tell them, hey, we grew up the same way you guys grew up. We grew up in the same situations. The difference in our lives is this relationship. And you get to see, you know, the young people that are part of this team, you see them grow. You see them own a sense of, or have a sense of confidence. You know, you could be, I've seen some, the shyest at the beginning of the month, oh, I don't want to go talk to that person, I don't want to share. By the end of the month, you know, you gotta literally drag them on the bus because they want to stay out there telling people about Jesus. You know, like you see the growth, you know, a young Native American can possess, especially when God gets a hold of their hearts. You know, and that's what my ministry is geared towards, is those young people. You know, there's a leadership conference, our leadership discipleship center that's being built in Arkansas right now to help equip young people that want to go into ministry and to share, you know, Jesus, and to do events and to do things like that, to equip them with the necessary tools to go and do that. And I'm going to be a part of that, you know, and it's all glory is to God. You know, that's the one thing I can say at the end of the day. And I could stand up here all day and, you know, share numerous stories, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, I just want you guys to remember, you know, that you're God's masterpiece. Even the word masterpiece, in its original language, is poema, which means poem. You are God's living poem. So with that, thank you for letting me come up here and speak and tell you a little bit about the ministry that I work for. And thank you for coming alongside us and bringing the young people up to that leadership summit. Yeah.
Wes, real quick, tell them how soon you're going to Arkansas.
Oh, I'm moving to Arkansas at the end of this month.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you're probably tired. And I don't know if you want to do this. Can you share about your father, the reconciliation, and
I'd love to.
his salvation?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I was about 20 years old, so 2 years after I began a relationship with Christ, 3 years, I was probably about 21, and I had my first year of On Eagle's Wings. God got a hold of my heart and really showed me that I was supposed to tell people about Jesus, because I went to, my first reservation was Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and it was the first place that I shared my testimony. And like I told you guys, you know, how terrified and scared I was, what I wanted to do was I wanted to trust God. I wanted to trust God with that. And so I did. I shared my story, and I had a young guy come up to me about the same age at the time. I was 18. There was another guy who came up to me and said, "That's my story." He said, "The only difference is you have Jesus." He said, "I want that. I want that relationship." You know, and it really just solidified what I was supposed to do with my life. It was to share Jesus with the lost and the broken. And I got involved in a Bible college in Flagstaff. And it was at that Bible college that God was really calling me to do something I didn't want to do. And that was to forgive my dad. Basically what was happening was, I'm asking God to forgive me, and yet I'm not even willing to forgive him. And some of you guys know the story about the king who forgave somebody who owed him money. So this guy had a substantial amount of debt. I can't remember where it was in the Bible, but he owed the king a substantial amount of money. And the king said, "Don't worry about it, it's all right." But what had happened was later, that guy who had owed all that money, who had been pardoned of his debt, somebody else owed that guy money. And instead of forgiving him and pardoning him, he held him accountable. And he said, "You owe me money." And it was significantly less. And still he was being petty and said, "You owe me money." And the king heard of this and saw this and said, "Wicked person." And of course he was thrown in jail. But it made me think, at the end of that story, it said, this is how the kingdom of heaven is. You know, that we're on the topic of grace. You know, it's so easy for us to receive God's grace. But man, is it tough to give out that exact same grace. And I'm starting to see that. I've only been angry, like really angry at God twice in my life. The first time was when I knew that God was asking me to forgive my dad. Not asking, he was commanding me. He was commanding me to forgive my dad. And I knew that's what he's wanting in my life, because I started to realize that that unforgiveness that I had towards my dad was bleeding into the other relationships in my life. With my friends, with the leadership, with all these different things in my life, it was starting to bleed into it. And it was starting to affect all these different things in my life because I wasn't addressing it, because I wasn't making it known, or that I wasn't dealing with it. And so God literally had to make it happen. I got a phone call from the hospital, and they were telling me my dad had got into a fight. He had a blunt force trauma to his head. So his brain was swelling up against his skull, and they said he might not make it. And this hospital that he was at was only 5 minutes away from the school that I was attending. That was literally God telling me I needed to go, and I needed to talk to my dad. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna go see my dad. And I went over there, and I got to the hospital, and in my mind, I had always made my dad into something bigger than he really was. And so at that moment, I was like, oh, I need to prepare myself, because I don't know what my dad's gonna do. I don't know what he's gonna say. I need to prepare myself physically, mentally, spiritually to overcome my dad. But just as I was about to open up the door to his room, I felt like that 11 and 12-year-old again. I was afraid and I was scared. But there was also one thing I wanted to do in that moment. You know, it says fear not in the Bible 365 times. It says it so many times because it's something that we deal with every day, fear. And I wanted to trust that I was going to be okay. I wanted to trust God's promise that I was going to be okay through this. So I opened the door. You know, God broke my heart. You know, I saw my dad laying there. You know, he looked up at me with his one good eye, and I finally saw what God was trying to show me. And I'd never seen my dad look vulnerable in his life. And you can tell drugs and alcohol caught up to his life. He was really skinny. And I remember just looking at him and thinking, you know, my dad's just another native guy who needs Jesus also. And I was finally seeing all my life that I was looking at my dad through my pain and through my anger. And then God was finally showing me to look at him through God's eyes. What does God see when he looks at my dad? And I shared with my dad who Jesus was. I shared with him why I was there. Why I was even able to be there. It was because of this relationship, this hope that I found. And of course my dad said he wasn't ready. He said, you know, I'm not ready. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's still going on in his life, and he felt like he wasn't ready for it. But you know, it definitely opened up a door for my dad to see Jesus on a different level. And a couple more years down the road, I started to hear rumors, you know, about my dad. You know, my dad, he was still drinking, he was still doing things like that, and he finally said, you know, I need to get into a rehab. And the rehab that he got involved in was a Christian rehab. And I'm so thankful. But the men at this rehab walked alongside my dad's life, shared with my dad who Jesus was. And my dad dad gave his heart to the Lord. And I remember hearing it, and I needed to hear it for myself. You know, I needed to know. And I remember I called him, you know, and I said, you know, Dad, is this true? You know, I'm hearing all this stuff. You know, did you give your heart to the Lord? Did you choose Jesus? And he was like, no. He was like, pretty sure Jesus chose me. You know? And I remember I was trying so hard not to cry, and I had never, how old was I? I was 25, 26. And never would I have imagined that one day I would hear my dad ask me, son, can I pray for you? You know, words I thought I'd never hear in my life, and God gave me that. And, you know, I got to, you know, God called my dad home this past April, and it definitely hurts. It's definitely still fresh, but what gives me so much hope and what I glorify God with every day is that, you know, God answered my prayers when I prayed for my dad. In the times that I didn't believe the prayer, and in the times I did, and through all of that, you know, my dad's with Jesus. And, you know, if there's anything that I could give from out of that is someone in your life that you are holding something against, unforgiveness, I would recommend that you would try to the best of your ability to see them through God's eyes. And, you know, there's nothing too big, too small and too big for God. And I'll have to leave with that, you know. But thank you for allowing me to be here.
Amen.